Pick something groovy, Alex.
Good evening and welcome to the Democratic Voice. Thank you for tuning in this evening. Wherever you're at, we appreciate you, America. All of our service members serving worldwide, thank you for the job you're doing. Thank you for those first responders that keep us safe here in the homeland. We thank you very much for all the work you're doing. I'm your host, Fred Hardy, and tonight we're going to do a little different than we usually do. We aren't going to talk about politics so much. We're going to talk about things that are happening here in Iraq, all over the world. But let's talk about those things. But I must warn you, and you will see on the screen a graphic telling you that some of the scenes you see this evening will be very graphic. So if you have children watching or adults, if you're a little squeamish, I suggest that you cover your eyes or tune out, because things that you're going to see this evening, things that we must face up to, and that's the reason I'm bringing those things to you. Some of the things that are happening are just atrocious. Now, the photos that I want you to look at now, I want you to think about, where were these photos taken? Were these in the red zone in Baghdad, where we hear every day about the people, the Iraqis being killed, being beaten by their forces, all of these things. Now, after you've had an opportunity to look at those and think about where this happened. Now, I think you're going to be very surprised when you hear that this did not happen in Iraq, not in the red zone. And looking at the pictures of a man that was beaten literally to death here in El Paso County, our city of Colorado Springs. This was a man beaten to death, and no alcohol was involved. No drugs were involved. Nothing was involved but one man that his wife had recently left him. He was left in charge of his children, and he was having perhaps a little mental breakdown. But when his children called for help from 911, did he get necessary when the police came? No, the police came. The police talked to him through a window in his house, knew there were no children, no one else in the apartment, and other police broke through the door. And at that time, after they broke through the door and came in and literally took the man in the bathroom, no clothes on, beat that person to death. There were medical personnel standing by which could have solved the problem very easily by looking at the person and realizing that the man was having mental problems. But we hear far too often of people being just taken by our police department. And we have a great police department, by the way. Maybe they don't have sufficient training to handle all the people that they run into. And perhaps when they're facing no harm, or no one else is facing no harm, then why should they look into using deadly force on anyone? Now, this is a story of a family that's been completely rocked by this man's death. It is the most horrific story that I've ever run into, and I've traveled in combat worldwide looking at atrocities happen. But when it happens right here in our hometown, then we are really absorbed into what is really happening with our system. So without me crying or showing you how much I really care about this, I want to introduce you to the victim's sister. And the victim was Gregory Herring. Gregory Herring was the picture that you've been looking at. And Mrs. Moore, she is the sister of the victim. Now, let me give a little background on her before she went to school here in Colorado Springs. She is married to a military person, and when this atrocity happened, she was, I believe, stationed in Germany. Her husband served in Iraq, so she was away from the family. And I would like for her to tell you of all those things. And I didn't mention, it was such a horrific experience that Mr. Herring's mother suffered a stroke when all of this happened because of the misery heaped on her as a mother. Now, I would like to say to you, Mrs. Moore, thank you for being with us. Please tell us your story and tell us a little about you and your family. And the reason I'm asking you to do this, Mrs. Moore is the person is now responsible taking care of the 3 children involved. Thank you for being with us. And tell us a little about you and your husband, Marcus, and your family.
My family. I grew up here in Colorado Springs, which you mentioned, and we were stationed in Germany. My husband is in the Army. We have a total of 9, 10, I don't remember, 8 children. We have a total of 8 children. The oldest is 20, the youngest is 4. And we've come back to Colorado Springs to care for my mother that you mentioned earlier, who suffered a stroke and a heart attack after my brother's beating.
And you are taking in the number of children you were counting your brother's children in that to say, I'm taking care of those now too. Is this correct?
Yes, but my 8 and their additional 3. So
you really have your hands full. That's what I wanted to bring out.
Right.
That is a tremendous responsibility. And with that responsibility, these things, as we go on, tell us a little about your brother now, that the person that was attacked by the police and beaten literally to death.
My brother was really well known in the community of Colorado Springs for working for the Drug Task Force and keeping children off the streets and gang prevention. He was an inventor, an entrepreneur, and he was always seen outside the Walmart on Platt Street passing out cards about keeping kids off the streets and off of drugs. And he was well known for walking the old lady across the street with her groceries, and he was a real good humanitarian type of a person. The tragedy that happened to him was devastating. I wasn't expecting it to be him beaten to death, because originally when we got the call in Germany, the detective told me that my brother just had a heart attack. And it wasn't until we got here for the funeral that the coroner told my father to bring a camera, and we took pictures and found that my brother was beaten to death.
Wow. And after the funeral, and I'm sure this is, you took depositions from the policemen and everything involved. Could you tell us, without revealing too much about the depositions that we're taking, what these things really revealed?
The depositions were really, really detailed. We deposed the AMR, 4 Colorado Springs Police Department officers, the chief of police, and the fire department. There was on the scene, that I recall, 3 officers that were actually there that we were actually charging originally in the case. My attorney is Rob Frank, and we had charged the city of Colorado Springs, the chief of police, and the city police officers. The deposition was very detailed, and it confirmed a lot of information that I really didn't understand and know exactly what had happened to my brother with the beating. But apparently my brother was having a breakdown, and the police were responding to someone who was running around the neighborhood. And when they had gotten there, he was in his apartment, totally naked, and he was having a conversation with one of the officers outside the door. 3 of the officers were told to kick down the door and to approach my brother and spray him with mace in his face. Because he was suffering a breakdown, I've learned that mace can actually counteract someone having a breakdown and cause an extreme rage that they weren't having originally, but causing them to have one. The police, I feel, according to depositions, reacted to someone they thought was a very big black man that they felt intimidated by, trying to apprehend him. A struggle happened, and he was eventually beaten into cardiac arrest. One particular officer plunged his thumb into my brother's neck, which cut off his respiratory and artery, and then eventually he went into cardiac arrest.
Let me ask you, were medical people present at this time, or were they being held back to keep from, tell me about this.
Originally, according to depositions, the AMR were all staged outside along with the fire department. They were told not to come in, and they were staged outside waiting to come in. And what I learned in deposition is that they just came in on their own because they were wondering and hoping that they could get in there to help whoever needed medical attention. So on their own, they came in, and that's when they encountered my brother in a struggle with the police department.
What did they use to beat your brother with?
I don't know exactly what it's called. I think it's called a PR-24. What I recall in the depositions is that the officer was saying that they took the PR-24 and they were just hitting him continuously.
Would we call that I'd call it a nightstick, or one of those
Right.
big sticks that they carry around?
Correct.
Okay, wow. And beat him repeatedly, and as you can see from the photos that you've seen before, the results of that beating. Now, when we're talking about now the police coming in, I understand that there was a breakdown in communications between the sergeant, I believe it was talking with your brother through the window, and the cops that came in. The cops that came in didn't realize that there was no one else in the apartment except your brother. Is this correct?
Yeah, it is. From what I understood in depositions is that the radio equipment went out, so the officers that came later than the one sergeant that was talking to my brother outside of his window, their communication went out, so they didn't have any knowledge that there wasn't anybody in the apartment outside of my brother. They weren't aware of the fact that the children had already left the apartment and my brother was in there alone. The sergeant that was outside the window was aware that my brother was alone.
And still ordered him to, without any warrant or anything, to break down the door and go in and beat a man violently with nightsticks, and at least 3 people, as I understand, were beating on him at one time. And to do these things, that's most horrendous, and it's bad for me to even have to ask questions about and talk about. And but now that you were taking care of the children, and this must have been a great traumatic experience for his children, even when I hesitate to even talk about it, but the children, the traumatic things that they saw with their father and everything, I can only imagine now. And when was there a small restitution made by the city of Colorado Springs to take care of any bills or anything that were outstanding?
The children suffered tremendously. When I got the children, I got custody of them approximately a year later after my brother was killed. They needed severe counseling. They were traumatized. The oldest had a major hate for police. The things that they saw, children should have never saw. The things that they heard, children should have never heard, and they were devastated by it. My attorney, we have filed a suit in federal court in Denver, and the estate was settled with the police department regarding his estate, but the children did not receive compensation. There is some type of a law called Trujillo, and in my opinion protects police from being sued when they're doing things that are outrageous. And the children have suffered tremendously, and they haven't received any compensation for what happened to their father.
And the amount of compensation that was paid for this death didn't even cover the bills that were outstanding, as I understand this. So it's time we in Colorado Springs, we in El Paso County, we in the state of Colorado, we have to reach out and do something about those things. And we have to have the laws changed to demand that when police officers are hired, they go through multiple testings and they serve the community. And perhaps they were not bad cops. They had just not received the training necessary to realize, to recognize the trauma they were running into. If they had, this would not have been one of the consequences. So we must realize that the police department, that all of us, that everyone that works for government works for the people, all of the people, not just part of the people, but all of the people. So when we're talking about this now, are the kids back in school now? And you haven't told me how your mother's doing now.
The children are back in school. They're doing well. My mother, after suffering her stroke and heart attack, she did well. She was totally paralyzed. She couldn't walk, she couldn't talk. But today she can walk with a walker and she can talk. She's had an additional stroke since then as well. But her whole motivation was moving back to Colorado Springs and getting my brother's children, because that was her heart. And my brother was her heart and the children were her heart. And that helped her rehabilitation quite a bit, just getting the kids and having a relationship with them. The children, they do still have quite a few medical expenses that have not been covered. And they're still in counseling, but they're stable. They're stable.
Well, we can appreciate them being stable, but Colorado Springs, El Paso County, all of us must reach out to this family, reach into your pocketbook, reach out and do things for this family. Now, you can reach us. We'll be glad to put you in contact with Ms. Moore. We will have a telephone number that you can reach out to them directly. Tell them about the things that you can do for them, because they need help. Yes, lawsuits are great, but sometimes we're talking about 3, 5, 10 years to settle lawsuits. And we need something done for this family, and we need it done now to take care of this. Now, we not only need something immediately for Ms. Moore and the children, we need to take care of the training necessary for our police department. We hear about, we're going to do cutbacks in the budget for this, cutback in the budgets for that. But let's get well-trained police people on the beat out there, the people that are taking care of the things. Give them the necessary training to take care of it. We have many activists in the communities that just look out at all times for these things to do. Now, we will on a weekly basis be bringing you the story of a different person that they have been wronged by the police, or the police will be given an opportunity. Every time we put something on the air, we invite the El Paso County Police, the city of Colorado Springs, to refute what's being said. We invite the DA's office to give us reports on these cases. Now, Ms. Moore, let me ask you a direct question. What has the district attorney's office done to tell you about these things, or what's being done in this case?
The district attorney has never contacted me. I've called his office a couple of times. I've never gotten a response. And as far as I know, they've never even opened an investigation regarding this case.
Wow. Now that's really where district attorneys are coming from, their jobs to reach out. Now, I will let politics slide in someplace. We hear about a man running for governor, Bill Ritter, that he's running for governor, and he was a district attorney in Denver. So now he knows what a district attorney is supposed to be doing, and when he's elected as governor, I will be calling on him to shed light on what's happening in Colorado Springs in our Justice Department. Sometimes, the Justice Department, we need to push them along a little to get them to realize that they work for everyone in our community. So what would you expect from the DA's office? What would you like for them to tell you and bring you up to date on this?
I'd like them to tell me that they investigated the case. I'd like them to tell me that they had some type of a closure of understanding what actually took place, and to take some type of responsibility. I've gotten no apologies from anybody. There's been no justice as far as I can see. Nothing has happened. This whole story has been so hush-hush that there's been nothing done about the case, and it bothers me. It bothers me that the children have suffered, my mom has suffered, I've suffered, my husband, my entire family, and the DA has not even picked up the phone to say anything. And there's some guilt there. There's a lot of guilt there. My brother would be alive today if they were well trained.
No doubt about it. And when we're talking about getting people trained to do their job and do it better, now the detective, the lead sergeant, I shouldn't say detective, the lead sergeant, is he still holding his job previously? Have you heard anything about it? Or?
According to what I heard in depositions, the sergeant that was on charge that particular day is now a street cop.
He's been demoted. Then that means that there's a responsibility out there that some internal investigation of some place has determined that this sergeant was not doing his job and doing it well. So I call on you, Colorado Springs Police Department, to pick up that rock. Let's see what crawls out when we're talking about why, if a sergeant was relieved and put on the street and he's still out there facing the public, and you had responsibility for what's happening to the 3 children that we're looking at, and when we see 3 children that need help, what's being done about it? Now, District Attorney's Office, what are you doing about it? What will you do to bring closure to Mrs. Moore and this family, to Mr. Herring's mother? If I can just only, being a father, I can just only imagine, if this happened to my son, and when we talk about happening to my son, how horrific it would be and what the heartache would be if this happened. And mothers always say that their sons are their favorites, so when your son, something happens like this, mothers, it doesn't matter where you're at, just think about if this had been your son. If this had happened just because your son had a mental breakdown and was expecting help. And another statement, which I want to verify right now, when the officers broke in the door and Mr. Herring looked at him and said, "Are you here to hurt me?" And they, standing with their guns drawn on him, tried to tell him no. Is this
That's
a
true.
factual statement?
Yes, that's true.
Now that really hurts. When you want to know if someone is here to help you and they're pointing a gun at you, and medical care is standing by and they won't bring in the medical care to help you. So as we go on with the depositions that have been taken, and we go on with different cases that we're talking about, I'll come back to you in just a moment to ask you a few more questions. I hope I don't break down in the middle here, but we have so many cases. I've talked with different people about the cases that they are having, and instead of the police saying, okay, we're here to help, they're tasering people in the back. They're doing the many things to show authority, not compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion is one of the things that we must look at in our police force. Now, when you hear me talking about policemen, don't think that I don't like policemen, because my oldest son is a policeman. So I know how policemen should act. And it's not with that big bang of authority, it's with that compassion necessary to take care of the public. That's your responsibility. And to keep us all safe, and to keep us safe, you don't need to be out doing horrendous things to people. Get respect for our police department. That uniform that they're wearing, have everyone respect it. Now, we must go deeper than this. When we as America have more people in jails than any country in the world, then we have a problem with our system. And when we have a problem with our system, we must start looking at the laws of how to correct this on people before they get the age of going out and getting in jail. Now, we must start back with our school systems, our preschool systems. We hear many of the other party talking about, let's cut funds for pre-kindergarten, let's cut funds for this. No, we need to spend more money on those children out there and less money on those people that we have to incarcerate. So when we're talking about that, let's remember that we have to correct the problem. And the problem starts not when a young man is 18 or a young woman is 18. It starts when a young man or woman is 8 or 9 months old, the nutrition they get, all of the things necessary to bring up a person right. It doesn't matter who we are, where we are, we all deserve an America that we can all be proud of. Now, saying all of this, getting the tears out of my eyes a little, Mrs. Moore, would you just give the people a number if they can call, if they would like to talk to you, ask you questions, or tell them how they can contact you?
Yes, 719-761-6143.
Could you do that again, please? 719 what?
761-6143.
That number is flashing on your screen. I suggest that you pick up that phone right now. And if you have questions that you would like to ask Ms. Moore, please call her and please tell her you will help with bringing up the children, all of the things that we need to get done. Tell her about this. Now, this family needs your help, and anything that you could do to help the family would be greatly appreciated. Pick up the phone and call your congressman. Pick up your phone and call your city councilman. Call the people that's necessary to get the laws changed and get things done so we can bring up children that won't be out being shot at age 18. Get cops that are trained to take care of people, not to go out and shoot people. That's what we must do as not only Americans, but as Coloradans. We must do those things. We must spend the money. Yes, it does take a few dollars to put children in preschool, but it takes far less dollars than it does to incarcerate them when they're 18 and keep them in jail for all those years. Again, thank you for being with us and bringing us your story. Thank you, Mrs. Herring, and thank you for your son's life and the things that he could have accomplished. We appreciate each and every one of you. We ask for your support, and we ask that you do what's right for America, what's right for every one of our citizens. We thank you for tuning in this evening, and be with us again next week. Thank you. Good night.